Hey everyone, this is Theo from ParkerBlocks.com. In today's video, I'm going to compare the Microsoft Surface Pro 2017 with the iPad Pro 2017. Now my comparison will be from the perspective of a content creator. I use computers and devices like this to create content. More specifically, I write a lot. I do photo and video editing. I also create digital art. So today I'm going to talk about these two tablets, how they fare in the workflow of a content creator. Let me give you the bottom line up front first. Whenever people ask me whether or not they should go for the Surface Pro or the iPad Pro, I always give them this recommendation. If you already have a computer at home, the iPad Pro may be a more suitable option because it does not duplicate what you already can do with your computer. If you do not have a computer, or if you are thinking of upgrading your computer, then I think the Surface Pro would be a more suitable option because it has all the desktop functionality and it can do a lot of things that the iOS cannot do, which I'm going to show you later on. If you are a digital artist and you are wondering which one is the better digital portable sketchpad or which one has better drawing functionality, well, I can tell you that whatever you can create, whatever you can draw on the iPad Pro, you can do the same on the Surface Pro as well. In that respect, they are pretty evenly matched. The main difference would be the feeling of drawing on the tablets. They do feel a bit different because of the stylus. So for the Surface Pro, we have the Surface Pen, and for the iPad Pro, we have the Apple Pencil. They feel a bit different when it comes to drawing. They also function a bit differently. I'm going to talk about those things later on. Alright, so that's the bottom line. Let's talk about the difference in specifications. So this unit that I have runs on Intel i5, has 8 gigs of RAM and 256 gigs of storage. You can expand more storage with the micro SD card, which currently costs around $100 For that, you can get an additional 200 gigs of storage. This is the iPad Pro with 4 gigs of RAM and 256 gigs of storage. Even though the iPad Pro only has 4 gigs versus 8 gigs of RAM, I have never experienced any lag on the iPad Pro before. Maybe one reason is because there aren't a lot of apps that allow me to really push the iPad Pro to the limits. Same applies to the Surface Pro. 8 gigs of RAM is sufficient if you really need to do a lot of multitasking. You need to open a lot of Chrome tabs, you need to open Photoshop, you need to do photo editing, you need to write. 8 gigs of RAM is sufficient, but if you can, go for the 16 gig if you have the budget. But other than that, the performance on both of these tablets, they are very smooth. I have never noticed any lag before. The battery life on this, the Surface Pro, is about 6 hours to 7 hours. On this is really fantastic. You can get about 9 hours to maybe 10 hours. I would say 9 hours. So this is 9 hours versus 6 hours. Even though the battery life is 3 hours shorter compared to this is actually a significant improvement to the Surface Pro 4, which only has 3 to 4 hours of battery life. So this is now a much more decent portable device. The Surface Pro has a 12.3-inch screen, the iPad Pro has a 12.9-inch screen, so this is slightly larger. Both use IPS panels, so the color reproduction is fantastic. On the Surface Pro, because this is a desktop OS, you can actually color calibrate this specific screen. As for the iPad, well, you really have to depend on the color calibration that Apple has provided. So I like the fact that you can calibrate this because I use this with my external monitor and I need to color calibrate this. Both the screens, they are very glossy. I actually have a matte screen protector that is pasted onto the iPad Pro because the Apple Pencil, it feels a bit slippery on the glass surface as compared to the Surface Pen on the Surface Pro. That's because on the Surface Pen, the tip here, it is not those hard plastic tips. There is actually some sort of texture. It provides slightly more control. It is less slippery compared to the Apple Pencil, and that's why I have this screen protector. The screen protector also provides that additional texture which feels very paper-like, and it feels very nice. You can of course put a screen protector on the Surface Pro as well, but one thing to note about the screen protector is it's going to affect the sharpness a bit, because this is after all still a plastic quality screen protector. It's going to affect the sharpness and the clarity of the screen. The ports that are included with the Surface Pro would be the micro SD card slot, which you can use to expand the storage without spending too much money. There is also this mini display port, which I use quite often to connect to an external monitor, and there is also this very useful USB Type-A port, which I use quite often as well to connect my USB devices. For example, this is a memory card reader. I can just plug it in like this, and I also can back up my system using an external storage. I know that many people complain that why is there not a USB Type-C. Personally, for me, most of my devices are still using this port. It's not a downside to me. So we have 3 very useful ports with the Surface Pro. For the iPad Pro, it only has this Lightning port, so if you want to transfer photos from your SD card, you need to buy an adapter or dongle in order to do that. I take a lot of photos, so if I were to actually go outdoors on an assignment, there is no way I will use the iPad Pro. I will definitely use this, because on the Surface Pro it runs desktop apps. I can use Adobe Lightroom. I can edit photos very quickly in a fraction of the time that I can with any of those photo editing apps on the iPad. So that's just the way it is. The USB port is really helpful when it comes to transferring files. Like I can transfer files to thumb drive, to my phone, to an external drive. But if you want to transfer files on the iPad Pro, you have to do so wirelessly, or again you need to buy some sort of adapter. To transfer files on this, I usually use AirDrop to transfer to my Mac. I'm using an Android phone, so if I connect my Android phone to this, the Android phone turns into an external hard disk. I can drag and drop the files very easily. But the Android phone, it doesn't work with the iPad Pro. So if you want to transfer files to a phone, you have to get their Apple iPhone, which is much more expensive. Another feature that I like about the Surface Pro is the built-in stand. But I do not like this angle, because it's no different from putting it flat on the table. And when you adjust it to an angle like this, and if you were to be drawing on it, you press down a bit, it actually just moves down. So it's tight, but it's not that tight. I actually prefer the angle on the Surface Pro 4, which is something like this, which is much higher. So this is actually not an improvement, but it's still quite helpful, because you can sort of put the stand like this and you can watch some shows like this. With the iPad Pro, you do have to get a case for the functionality so that you can tilt the iPad Pro up. Alright, enough about the specs and the physical differences. Let me talk about the OS. So this runs Windows OS. This is a desktop OS, so you can install desktop apps. You can install Adobe Photoshop, Lightroom. You can install video editing software like Premiere. There are a lot of graphic apps that run on this: Krita, Midibang Paint Pro, Clip Studio Pro, and Corel Painter. There is a huge variety of desktop apps, and those desktop apps usually have a lot more functionality compared to tablet versions of drawing apps. One significant advantage of desktop OS is the file system that everyone is familiar with. Say for example, I'm using Photoshop. I want to save a file. I can save it onto the desktop, Or I can create a folder, I can save it into that folder. Later on, when I'm using some other application that can open that file, I can use that app to open the file, or I can right click on the file here and open it with any apps that are listed in the contextual menu. It's really easy to save a file and to find a file and to open a file with other apps. And if I want to upload that file to a website, for example, if I have saved a picture, I want to upload it to my blog, it's very easy. I just open the browser, I can upload it there. If I want to download a file, maybe a zip file, a driver, or some documents, I can very easily download that document just by right-click on the link and download it into the system and download the file to any place where I want. Now, this is very easy on desktop OS, but on the iOS, it is not that easy. Let me show you. The most frustrating thing on the iOS to me is the file system. It's really silly. So with iOS 11, they have this new app called Files, which is supposed to help you handle your files and folders, to do some file management. It's really limited. For example, right now, I am inside the Files app. I want to create a folder so that later on when I do a drawing, I can save that drawing into that folder, and I am not able to do it. So I click here on my iPad. These are the only folders on my iPad right now. I want to create a folder so that later on when I draw a picture, I can save it into that folder. So there is no way for me to create a folder here, which is really weird because this is a very basic function. The only way to create a folder is to click on this iCloud Drive, and here we have this little folder icon with the plus icon, so you can create a folder on the cloud drive, but not on the iPad itself using the Files app, which is so silly. To get around that, you have to buy another app called Documents. This is actually a separate app. This is Documents, and this is not free, by the way. Documents will integrate with the Files app, and it will appear here in the tab here. And this is where you can create a folder, but by default, you cannot create a folder using the Files app. You need to buy something else. And this is where I'm going to create a folder. So let's create a folder called Photos. Say I have already saved all the photos into a folder, so I want to use Lightroom CC to import all the files. So let me just click this icon here to add photos and click on this files thing. Alright, so let's look for the photo folder. It's here, and I want to select all these 5 files. There is no way for me to select all of them, so I have to do so one by one, which is really very silly. The other way is to import using the Photos function, but you need to save those files into the Photos app, not into the Files app. So you see how complicated it can get. I just want to save it into a folder, and when I'm using the app to open the files, I want to be able to select all the files. It's a very simple function. So now I have to do it one by one, which is really, it's not productive. All right, say that I have already edited all the photos and I want to upload those photos onto my blog. So let me choose the files to upload. Let me take a look. All right, there is no way for me to select all the 5 photos again. The other way to upload photos here is to choose the photo library, but this would mean that I have to save those photos into the Photo app, not back into the Files app. So with the Photos app, I can choose multiple files to upload. Again, why do I have to choose between the Photos app and the Files app when the photos are already in the Files app? Let me show you another silly thing about the Files app. So I'm inside Procreate now. I just want to do a very quick drawing and later save this drawing into the Files app. So this is drawn in Procreate. Let me just go to the gallery. So now this is auto save into Procreate's gallery. And now I want to save this into Files app. So I have to share this. Let me create a Procreate file and share it to Files. So let me just click here, save to Files. Let's click on my iPad. So usually with desktop OS, you can create a folder to save that file into that folder. But here we cannot create any new folder, so I have to save that picture into an existing folder. Let me click on Procreate. So let me add this picture into the Procreate folder. And let's go and find that folder now. So that folder, it's here, Procreate. So this is that file, that Procreate file. So let me just click on this and it opens up in Procreate. And guess what? Now I have two of the same files in Procreate, this and this. What happens if I open that file again? Let me click it again. Now I have three files in Procreate. Why would opening a file duplicate that file? I have no idea why. But on desktop OS, whether it is on Mac OS or Windows, when you open a file, it just opens that file. It doesn't duplicate that file. So this is really weird. Another thing that I do not like is there is no easy and quick way to identify the type of file there is inside the folder. For example, I have two files here. I do not know the file type. I need to long click on the file and then click Info, and this shows me that this is a Procreate file. On Windows or on Mac OS, you can see the file, you can see the file extension, you can see the date that the file was created or modified on. You can see the type of file, the size. It is so much more useful compared to this. Alright, enough rambling about the file system on the iOS, which I find quite confusing because sometimes when I save files, I need to remember that some files can only be saved into the Photos app, some files can only be saved into the Files app, and later on when I'm using some other apps, I need to know where I have saved that file previously. I need to go back and find it. It's definitely more confusing compared to the standard desktop file system, where everything is on the desktop. Let's talk about the drawing functionality now. So on the Surface Pro, we have the Surface Pen, which is sold separately. It costs around US $100, which is quite pricey. On the iPad Pro, the Apple Pencil is also sold separately. It costs the same, US $100. The previous model of the Surface Pro, which is the Surface Pro 4, when you're drawing slow lines, slow diagonal lines, they have that jitter, they are a bit wavy, and that was the deal breaker. But in this generation, this has significantly improved. The pen is now more sensitive and it's more accurate, and it has a very nice feeling when drawing on the surface. So let me just create a file using Medibank Paint Pro. Let me just zoom in. So you can use finger gestures to zoom in, to pan and move around or rotate as usual. Same on the iPad. The new Surface Pen has improved significantly over the previous generation. This is now way more sensitive, way more accurate. So when it comes to drawing slow diagonal lines, there is no more jitter. So you can get a line that is almost straight, and the line will always appear beneath the tip because this is an active stylus. When you have the stylus over the screen, you can see the cursor. That is where the line is going to be. And because this is an active stylus, there is perfect palm rejection. This new stylus is also much more sensitive because it has more pressure levels. I think it's about 4,000 levels. Not just that, the initial activation force is much lower now. So in the previous Surface Pen, you need to press down a bit harder in order to get the lines, in order to produce the lines. But now when you press down very lightly on the screen, just barely glancing the screen, you can get very thin lines like this. This is fantastic. So this also contributes to how much more sensitive this pen is. When it comes to drawing, whether or not there is lag really depends on the app that you use. So some apps will be very responsive, some apps will lag a bit, but overall when it comes to drawing with the Surface Pen, it is very enjoyable. I really like the felt tip on the Surface Pen. This provides that extra friction, so this is not very slippery even on the glass surface. It provides that extra control and it's really helpful. On the Surface Pen we have this eraser behind that you can turn around to use as an eraser. It works with most graphic apps. And this is actually a button as well, and we have a side button here as well. On the iPad Pro, the best stylus is of course the Apple Pencil, and the Apple Pencil is very sensitive as well, and it's very accurate. In terms of accuracy and sensitivity, I would say it's evenly matched with the Surface Pen. So when drawing diagonal lines like this, they do not have any jitter, they do not have any shake. And the transition between thin and thick, it's really good. It's very intuitive, very sensitive, very accurate, just like the Surface Pen. This app, by the way, is also MIDI-Bang, but this is the tablet version of MIDI-Bang Paint Pro. Very sensitive, it doesn't have any lag at all. It's also a very satisfying experience to draw with the Apple Pencil. Both the Apple Pencil and the Surface Pen are very capable styluses. So whatever you can draw on the iPad Pro with the Apple Pencil, you can draw on the Surface Pro with the Surface Pen as well. And both of these styluses, they actually have tilt sensitivity, but whether or not the app that you use will support tilt is another question. Not all apps will support tilt, so that's something to take note of. Battery life on the Apple Pencil is about a week if you draw quite often, and when it runs out of battery, you will get a notification panel here that tells you that you need to charge the Apple Pencil, and you need Bluetooth in order to use the Apple Pencil. And every time you switch off Bluetooth, you will need to connect the Apple Pencil to the iPad again in order to let the iPad understand that, hey, there is an Apple Pencil pad with the iPad. So each time you turn off Bluetooth and turn it on, you need to do this. And with the Surface Pen, the battery life is rated to be about 6 months to a year, so the battery life is fantastic. And it comes with this battery, which you can buy at any store easily. This is great because sometimes I find that batteries in styluses like this, they can wear out and it can render the whole stylus useless, but so far so good for the Apple Pencil, which is great. But I do have experiences with other brands of styluses where the battery went bad. So having a removable battery like this is fantastic. The battery life on this is phenomenal. 6 months to a year. Oh, you do need to pair this with your Surface Pro, but you need to only pair it once. After that, it is always paired. This does not need any Bluetooth connection, doesn't use Wi-Fi connection. It's always on. You do not need to switch on. It's always paired. So that's some of the differences between the Surface Pen and the Apple Pencil. And now I want to talk about the variety of apps and the quality of apps on Windows and on iOS. On iOS, for drawing apps, we have a fantastic selection, and most of these apps have been around for quite a long time, so they have been updated several times. They are very polished. We have Procreate, MIDI-Bang Paint Pro, Sketches Pro, Bamboo Paper, Adobe Draw, Adobe Sketch, Paper, and these are all very quality apps when it comes to drawing. And all these apps, they have been designed in such a way they have been optimized for finger use. For example, if you want to change the brush size, you can very easily do that with the dials here on the left side. This is Procreate, and all these buttons, they They are in a size, they're designed with a size that is really comfortable for finger use, and also everything is designed for stylus use as well. Very well designed, very polished, and this applies to many of the drawing apps that I use. On Windows platform, there are two types of apps. So there is the desktop app and there is the tablet app. For desktop apps, for example, this is Medibank Paint Pro. So to change the brush size here, it is much better to use the Surface Pen to drag the slider here, because this slider is too small for the finger. The better drawing apps on the Surface Pro would be Artridge and Sketchable. In terms of productivity, it really comes down to the type of work that you do. So for me, I write a lot. I need to edit a lot of photographs and I need to upload a lot of photographs. So on the Surface Pro, I can install Adobe Lightroom, which really saves me a lot of time when it comes to editing photographs. So in terms of productivity, this one I would say it's better compared to the iPad Pro for the type of work that I do. If I want to edit some videos, again, I would prefer using a desktop OS because I can use a mouse, I can get the cursor running around, I can use the keyboard shortcuts. It saves me a lot more time compared to editing the video on the iPad Pro using the Apple Pencil. And some of those apps, they are optimized for finger use. They may not have the keyboard shortcuts. Personally, for me, I can use keyboard shortcuts very fast. I memorize all the keyboard shortcuts and that really helps me save a lot of time. But when it comes to keyboard shortcuts on, for example, Procreate, all these apps here, they do not have a lot of keyboard shortcuts. So when you need work to be done really fast, I would still go with the Surface Pro. But if you are just going to get a tablet just for drawing purposes, I would say both are very capable tablets when it comes to drawing, creating digital art. And the last thing I want to talk about is this uses Intel processor, dual core. If you were to work on several applications at the same time, this gets heat up quite fast. In fact, this is quite warm right now. This is not something that you will want to put on your lap, but because it has a stand, it's best to go on a table. I just thought that I want to mention it, the heat. It's hot, but it's not like unbearably hot to the point where you cannot draw on the screen anymore. So it's still acceptable, just that it's warmer compared to the iPad Pro. So to summarize, if you just want to get a portable digital sketch pad to create art on, both are very capable devices. They are very evenly matched. However, if you want to do a bit more, personally, I would recommend the Surface Pro because of the desktop OS and the desktop functionality. Now, in real life, I actually use the iPad Pro more often, but that's because I do most of the desktop work using my desktop computer. So I just use the tablet for drawing purposes. For productivity work, photo editing, video editing, writing, I do it on my desktop. So my earlier recommendation still stands. If you already have a computer, then the iPad Pro may be a more suitable choice. But if you do not have a computer, or if you are thinking of upgrading to a new computer, then maybe the Surface Pro would be a better choice. So that's all for today's video. If you have any questions, let me know in the comment section below. If you have the Surface Pro 2017 or the iPad Pro 2nd generation and you use them for productivity work, to create digital art, to produce content, I would love to hear your thoughts about using them as productivity devices. So that's all. See you in the next video. Thanks for watching. Bye.